Support for this episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere is made possible by the Wessex Press, the premier publisher of books about Sherlock Holmes and his world. Find them online at wessexpress.com.
Also, Dan Andriaco's latest Sebastian McCabe, Jeff Cody mystery, Aaron Go Bloody.
And the Baker Street Journal, the leading publication of Sherlockian scholarship since 1946. Subscriptions available at bakerstreetjournal.com. I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, episode 105, Echoes of Sherlock Holmes.
I hear of Sherlock everywhere since you became a chronicler.
In a world where it's always 1895, comes I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, a podcast for devotees of Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the world's first unofficial consulting detective.
I've heard of you before. You're Holmes the meddler, Holmes the busybody, Holmes the Scotland Yard Jack in office.
The game's afoot as we discuss goings-on in the world of Sherlock Holmes enthusiasts, the Baker Street irregulars, and popular culture related to the great detective.
As we go to press, sensational developments have been reported.
So join your hosts, Scott Monty and Burt Wolder, as they talk about what's new in the world of Sherlock Holmes.
You couldn't have come at a better time!
Welcome to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast for Sherlock Holmes devotees where it's always 1895. I'm Scott Monty.
And I'm Burt Wolder.
And I'm here to wish you aloha, which of course you know is Hawaiian for hello and goodbye. For you see, I'm off to Hawaii this week, so I'm turning it over to you, Burt. Take it away.
How does he do that? He was here a second ago. He just pulled a Delta Sky Miles card from his pocket and zoom! Actually, it was a Platinum Delta Sky Miles card. And the next thing I know, I'm alone.
One alone to be my own. I alone to know her caress.
Well, I Hear of Sherlock is a two-hander, and we're not changing course now. All we've done is move our hands a little farther apart in time. That's all. We wanted to keep to our schedule and post this show on the 30th, but our guests were in California. One of us was only available early in the morning. The other one had business in Hawaii, and of course, he refused to take me. So much for friendship. Right? So much for the common bond of Sherlockian enthusiasm. But technology is our servant, and as you heard in the opening, we figured that we could so cleverly cut things together that you would hardly notice we weren't doing this at the same time. In fact, we almost fooled our guests, the talented twosome of Laurie King and Les Klinger, who join us today to talk about their latest anthology, Echoes of Sherlock Holmes. Holmes. But before we get to that, we do have to pause for just a quick word, just 60 seconds from one of our sponsors, and I do love that Merry Old England theme music. You are scholarly and well-informed, so I don't need to remind you that Kenric, king of the ancient Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Wessex, defeated the Britons at Barbary Castle in 556 in order to preserve the Wessex Press. And what better way to celebrate the 1460th anniversary of that amazing victory than by a visit to wessexpress.com. There you'll find One Fixed Point in a Changing Age, a new generation on Sherlock Holmes, an anthology edited by Christina Manenti, Maria Fleischak, Sarah Roy, and Taylor Blumenberg. This insightful scholarship about the canon and its modern manifestations is a trifling $24.95. The day is fresh-washed and fair, and there's the smell of tulips and narcissus in the air. On this holiday afternoon, reach for the pleasure only volumes from the Wessex Press can provide. Choose yours today. I want to visit the ancient Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Wessex, but I can't find a flight to the Wessex airport. Well, as I was unavoidably detained, Scott had the pleasure of talking with Les Klinger and Laurie King about their new book, Echoes of Sherlock Holmes. It is a terrific discussion, and it's worth hearing all the way through, because you'll hear about some of their upcoming projects, too, which are really interesting, as is this book. So, Scott, back to you.
Today, we have the pleasure of welcoming Laurie King and Les Klinger to the program. Laurie R. King is the New York Times best-selling author of numerous books, including the Mary Russell-Sherlock Holmes stories. She's won or been nominated for a multitude of prizes. She's been chosen as the guest of honor at several crime conventions and is probably the only writer to have both an Edgar Award and an honorary doctorate in theology. How about that? She was inducted into the Baker Street Irregulars in 2010 as the Red Circle. Leslie S. Klinger is one of the world's foremost authorities on Sherlock Holmes. Of course, you know him as the editor of the 3-volume set, The New Annotated Sherlock Holmes. And the first 2 volumes in that series, the complete short stories, won the Edgar Award for Best Critical Biographical Work. Les is also the editor of the New Annotated H.P. Lovecraft. He was inducted into the Baker Street Irregulars in 1999 as the Abbey Grange. Les and Laurie, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Great to be back.
Yeah, Les, I should note that you've been with us 3 times previously, way back in episode 31 and 32, and then, of course, in December of 2013, you joined us with Betsy Rosenblatt to talk about the Free Sherlock movement.
A serial offender.
Well, we're glad to have you nonetheless. And Free Sherlock actually had an impact on the work that the two of you have done together. I want to touch on that at a certain point. But you've done this twice before, collaborating on editing previous volumes of stories that have been inspired by the Sherlock Holmes canon. Of course, there was A Study in Sherlock, which was published in 2011 by Bantam Books, and then In the Company of Sherlock Holmes came along in 2014 by Pegasus Books. So your newest volume that we're here to really flog the heck out of and promote is Echoes of Sherlock Holmes, also published by Pegasus Books, and it's hitting bookstores on October 4th, 2016. So,
if not before.
Oh, we'd love that. We would love that. I'm sure it's available for pre-order everywhere, right?
Yeah.
It is. But just to finish up on the mechanics, for people who want signed copies, by the way, Poison Pen will have a supply of signed copies. And, of course, Laurie will definitely be at the Sherlock Holmes birthday weekend in December in New York, as will I, to sign books then. Maybe.
Definitely maybe.
We could, well, you know, we can work on fan mail and people cajoling you to be there. We'll do our best. So you've done this twice before, as I noted. What on God's green earth prompted you to come back and do this all over again?
Laurie, you want to start on that?
Well, I think Les and I would probably do it, even if Pegasus didn't pay us, although I won't say that for the record. It's just a fabulous thing. We get to wander around the halls of conferences like BoucherCon, spot people, exchange a quick texting back and forth with our co-editor, and then pounce on various people who are wandering around completely clueless that they're about to be brought into this world. Because the whole point of it is that these are people who are not Sherlock Holmes writers. They are people who write other kinds of things, mostly mysteries, but not always. And we pounce on them and say, don't you have a story somewhere that could be inspired by Sherlock Holmes? And sometimes they panic and run. But most of the time they get this faraway look in their eyes and say, well, now that you mention it, and we have them.
It's really been so much fun, Scott. As you could, if you go down the list of the writers in all three of the volumes, they're all friends, and they're amazing writers. They're still friends so far, and it's just been a joy to have them, as Laurie always puts it, play in our little sandbox here.
So just so folks know, in this volume, you've got people like David Morrill, you've got Hank Philippi Ryan, Dana Cameron, also a member of the Baker Street Irregulars. Who else do we have? Jonathan
Phillips.
Sorry?
Yeah, Jonathan Mayberry, who's been to the dinner at least once.
Yeah.
Tasha Alexander. John Connolly, the wonderful Irish mystery and sort of slightly horror writer. Deborah Crombie. Cory Doctorow, known for his science fiction. Hallie Efron, a longtime friend who has written great nonfiction as well as fiction.
There's Gary Phillips.
Meg Gardner.
Yeah.
Gary Phillips. We have the multiple award-winning Kent Kruger. A good friend of mine, the Irish fantasy writer Michael Scott, author of the Nicholas Flamel series. Anne Perry. And a true Scot, Denise Mina, and Katrina McPherson, both Scots.
So you mentioned friends, and you also mentioned stalking people at crime conventions. It's obviously an interesting mix. I mean, you could pick up the phone or shoot an email or a text to a friend, and not necessarily have the same impact as stalking them in the hallways of a convention. But how has the reception been overall? I mean, when people get this vacant stare, as you said, Laurie, is this something that they've ever considered before, or when you tap them, is this something that is kind of new to them?
Sometimes they have, and we try to make it people, as I said, who have never written in the Holmes genre before. But every so often we say, well, okay, we can force ourselves to take a story from you, such as Neil Gaiman.
Right.
And this was his second Sherlockian story. And there's other people. For example, we're putting together the next one, and I was amused to find that Craig Johnson's new book is all about Sherlock Holmes, and we'd already asked him, so he sort of snuck in too. But I think that Les maybe should tell you about our panel that we had at Left Coast Crime that sort of gave birth to the whole thing.
Yes, this was back probably about 2010. Laurie and I were at Left Coast Crime, and Don Cannon, the sadly now departed Don Cannon, asked me to put together a Sherlock Holmes panel. What a surprise. And, he said, well, Laurie could be on it. And I said, great. And I looked at the list of invitees, and I said, well, I'd like to ask Lee Child and Jan Burke and Michael Connolly. And he said, well, those are our guests of honor. We don't put all the guests of honor on one panel. I said, well, I happen to know that they are all secretly Sherlock Holmes fans. And trust me, it'll be a great panel. And so we put on the panel, and it was great. Lee, Michael, Jan all would really know very much about Sherlock Holmes, and then they'd come out with these wonderful erudite comments indicating that they knew a good deal about Sherlock Holmes. So after that panel, I said to Laurie, maybe we should ask these people to write for us. Michael Connolly was too busy at the moment, but he appeared in the second volume. Lee and Jan both appeared in the first volume.
So do you think there's some sort of admiration among these authors for Sir Arthur Conan Doyle? I mean, in some circles, he's viewed as a minor author and, not in the same rank as some of his contemporaries, like Robert Louis Stevenson or Oscar Wilde, for example. Are these authors admirers of Conan Doyle, or do they simply enjoy the Sherlock Holmes stories?
I think they're clearly admirers. I think every one of them would tell you that mystery genre would be totally different, maybe even non-existent today without the influence of the Holmes stories. They've all read them. They all know them very well, and they're delighted to get to do something inspired by their hero, Sherlock Holmes. It's always a pleasant surprise to find that. This is something I discovered many, many years ago, that some of my favorite writers turned out to be Sherlock Holmes fans. And it was nice to know that there was that overlap. In the case of Hallie Efron and Hank Philippi Ryan, both of them actually wrote reviews in the company of Sherlock Holmes that were very nice reviews. And we said to them, okay, now you're going to get punished for having written a great review. You have to write for us the next volume. And they were thrilled.
So watch out, anyone out there who doesn't want a story, because Les will get you.
Don't write a review if you don't want to write a story. I suppose the converse is true. Not every reviewer is going to get invited, right?
It's actually gotten to the point now where we've had agents approaching us about some of their clients who would like to write a story for us. I have to say that on the one hand, we have pretty much stuck to friends, but we've also been mindful of the realities of the publishing market. Claiborne Hancock, the publisher of Pegasus, has been very supportive, but he has this foolish idea that he'd like to actually sell the book. We're doing this just for art, but he wants to sell the book. So there is a certain requirement that the people that we select be people who are likely to attract readers to the book and help sell it.
Yeah, so it's more, seasoned, kind of proven authors on the balance than, say, young and newly discovered authors.
Well, I don't know. I mean, there's been 2 or 3 people that we've put in there who are not terribly well known, at least not in the mystery field. I think that each book, what we do is we sort of make a foundation of people that would appeal to name recognition, and then try and come up with an interesting flavor for the entire mix. Sometimes that means people who are well known, and other times it means people who are not terribly well known. And it's
for example, in the first volume, my friend Lionel Chetwynd is very well known in Hollywood. He's close to my age. He's basically a renowned screenwriter, and I knew he wanted to do a Sherlock Holmes inspired story, and he'd never written a short story before, but his story was brilliant. In the second volume, we had writers like Laura Caldwell, not known as this kind of a mystery writer. She writes mainly thrillers. We had, I'm just trying to think of a good example in that volume, Michael Sims, not known as a short story writer at all, who is very enamored of Holmes and loved the idea. Laurie, you have some examples in that volume?
In which one?
In the second volume. Some examples you wanted to point out. Oh, Cornelia Funke, a dear friend who loves Sherlock Holmes and is known for her children and YA books.
So when you're assembling these volumes, I mean, editing is a tough job. I don't think people really appreciate the difficulty.
Especially these are really tough.
Yeah. Right. I mean, you have to push yourself through every
these are really tough.
Come on now, let's.
Yeah, the tough part is wiping the drool off of my face anyway. As I read these stories, go, wow, this is a great story.
Yeah. So that brings to mind, I mean, how do you select what goes in and what doesn't go in? Because, an editor's job is removing stuff or just choosing what needs to be included. And that goes not only for, having read the stories themselves, but picking the authors in the first place so that you have a nice balance. How do you go about that?
We tend to go back and forth a lot. So that, in the first one, we had a certain number of people that had already said yes in various conversations before we even had the book title or the book contract or anything. And I would then say, for example, I said to Les, what about Colin Cotterill to bring in some humor? He's not terribly well known here, although he's better known than he was at the time.
Thank God.
Yeah. And I thought because the people that that we had already on board, we kind of figured would write fairly straightforward crime stories. I wrote to Colin, whom I don't think either of us had met at the time.
No.
And I wrote to him and I said, love your books. We're doing this anthology. Would you be interested in writing a story inspired by the Sherlock Holmes canon? So he wrote back and said, oh, I'd love to. Thinking at the time there might actually be some money in it.
Shame on you.
And I then, when I was looking at his website, realized that it was covered with these funny drawings that he had done. So I checked with the publisher first and said, could we do drawings in one of the stories? And just to make sure that I didn't ask him something that they would then throw up their hands and say, no. And they said, well, sure, I guess. And so I wrote to him and said, Colin, do you want to make it an illustrated story? Well, it ended up he wanted to do a graphic story, and he did this ridiculously funny graphic story, which I think set a pattern. We've had a graphic in each of them since then, and they're fabulous. They're just ridiculous and fabulous. And I mean, the most recent one is Mrs. Hudson, who answers all the questions we wanted to know about her.
Yeah, that's
done by my old friend Tony Lee, a very skilled comic book writer and former member of the Sherlock Holmes Society of London Council, so certainly a known Sherlockian, and his partner Bevis Musson. And by the way, in Volume 2, the graphic was contributed by good friends John Reppion and Leah Moore. Leah is Alan Moore's daughter, and the two of them had actually already done 2 full-length comic books of Sherlock Holmes, very serious graphic novels. This was a far cry from their serious stuff, but it was a lot of fun. So I mean, back to your question. We have never thrown out a story. We have never said to one of these great. It's really about selecting the writers, Scott, not the stories. Having selected the writers, we have been, I said the word drool, we have been so thrilled with the contributions that we've gotten from each and every one of the now almost, I think we're almost at 50 contributors among the 3 volumes. And they're great writers, and so surprised they turn in great stories. There is some editing that goes into the stories, but certainly not to the point of ever saying to anybody, gee, we really can't use that story.
Yeah.
It's a balance. Les and I have a kind of balance when we're editing a story. He often will have specific suggestions about making the story slightly more Sherlockian. There'll be a place where a small phrase or a small event or a name change would add a little touch of Sherlockian flavor to it. We never say to them, you have to do this. Merely that these are places that occur that if they want to, for example, one of the stories takes place during World War II, and there were a couple of places where a slight touch of analytical thought would have made it much more of a Sherlockian flavor. And so, that was accepted and the changes were made and the rest. That's the fun part. I then get stuck with going through and making sure that there's proper continuity in the story, that the plots work, which is not my natural forte, but I plow through it and do the actual editing. And of course, working with a publishing house, an actual publishing house, rather than trying to independently publish these things, means that we have their backup. So they actually can do the copy editing, can catch any grammatical errors, all that kind of stuff that my eye is just bad at.
They say you can't keep a good man down. Well, our prolific Sherlockian friend Dan Andriacco is back with another novel in his Sebastian McCabe, Jeff Cody mystery series. This time around, it's Erin Go Bloody. Now, if the name doesn't dissuade you, then listen on. In the small Ohio river town of Erin, Ohio, there's an annual St. Patrick's Day parade. Usually fun for all ages. But this year, a controversy threatens to disrupt the parade until murder intervenes. Enter Sebastian McCabe, the eccentric detective. Well, he's no Sherlock Holmes, but he walks in the footsteps of the master. Now, we won't give away any more than that, but suffice it to say that Bonnie McBird wrote of Dan, "You're in the hands of a master of mystery plotting here." Aaron Go Bloody is available now at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or your favorite independent bookstore. And be sure to follow Dan's blog, Baker Street Beat, at danandriaco.com. And like his Dan Andriaco Mysteries page on Facebook.
I want to say a word about the research, though, that we've seen in some of these stories. I mean, David Morrell, for example, this is just his nature, said to me, well, I'd love to write a story, but of course I'll have to do some research. Plunged into reading not only the entire canon again, but reading several biographies of Conan Doyle to write this one little story, and it's meticulously accurate. I remember in the first volume reading S.J. Roseanne's The Men with the Twisted Lips, which is essentially a retelling of the original story from a different point of view. And I thought, oh, gosh, there's several things here that she got wrong. And I did some checking, and oh, no, she'd gotten them absolutely right. She did a great deal of research, and it was all spot on. So once in a while, I do get to add something or correct something, but it's not very often.
That's refreshing, very refreshing. So, you know, all three of these books are subtitled Stories Inspired by the Sherlock Holmes Canon. Could you explain, particularly for our listeners, what's the difference between a pastiche and a story inspired by the canon?
I think we made it clear from the very beginning, from our very first letter that we were sent out to people, that we were not necessarily collecting pastiches. We were happy to have them, but if they wanted to set them on Mars in the 23rd century, if they wanted to do a sex change, if they wanted to write about creatures, we were happy to have anything that somehow felt to the writer and to the reader Sherlockian. And from that point, we got obviously some pastiches, but some fascinating variations on the theme as well.
I hark back to Volume 1. We had Laura Lippman, for example, write a lovely story about a 10-year-old girl who is not a Sherlock Holmes reader, but I think they call her Sherlock or something, and just learning about the power of secrets and the dangers of secrets. A charming story that is flavored of Sherlock Holmes, but is not a Sherlock Holmes story. I mentioned Lionel Chatwin. His story does not mention Holmes or Watson at all. It's a contemporary mystery. The detective is a sergeant major in the Army, and his sidekick, and boy, do they sound like Holmes and Watson.
Ah, that's great. So in collecting all of these, what was the biggest surprise, maybe an unexpected approach that was taken by an author?
Well, one candidate for that has to be the story by Michael Sims, which told Silver Blaze from the point of view of the horse.
That is pretty interesting.
I can't think of any of them that haven't been surprises. I mean, what happens as these stories are coming in, we usually have a deadline and we tell them, and we try to be fairly generous with our deadlines. And so they come in over a period of weeks and even months, so that each one is like unwrapping a present. And each one is this astonishing little prize that you read through and you think, oh, I never would have thought of that. And then you read through it again and you think, wow, that's really fun.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the brilliance of bringing together this disparate band of authors. You know, you really get a variety of selection there that wouldn't occur to, any single writer.
No, and the fact that it wouldn't occur to us because we haven't been working with them the whole time. I mean, it's not like we're saying, we'd like you to write a story based on Silver Blaze, or we'd like you to write one based on, Study in Scarlet. We simply open the door and say, we are here if you want any kind of research assistance, but otherwise have fun.
That's what,
and they do.
It really sounds like they're very self-motivated and driven to really deliver this for you?
Well, they're all A-list writers,
right.
And there's the reason. I mean, they didn't get there by accident. They got there because they are all true craftspeople and love writing fiction, and it shows.
Well, and I actually remember Hank Philippi Ryan when she was an investigative reporter back in Boston when I lived there. I remember her in her career 1.0. It's really refreshing to see her blossom too. So when we think about how remarkable it's been over the course of the last century and a quarter, that the Sherlock Holmes stories have continued to inspire people to write about them or to emulate them or to research them. I mean, Les, you know this more than anyone, given your annotated work. Is the literature of Sherlock Holmes, or are the Sherlock Holmes stories, I should say, unique in inspiring other tales and stories?
No, I don't think so. I mean, first of all, let's start with the book, the biggest bestseller of all time that's inspired countless stories, the Bible. There's a lot of great stories in there that ring bells and that make people want to emulate those stories or retell those stories. There are other canons. I mean, I think certainly there are other pastiches out there where the people have written about, whether it's Tarzan or Gone with the Wind or whatever. But I think in terms of sheer volume, the Sherlock Holmes stories have certainly produced more fan fiction and more pastiche than perhaps any other body of literature.
Maybe Shakespeare.
Shakespeare, yep.
Yeah, there was an interesting article in The Guardian by, I'm blanking. Anyway, there was an interesting article in The Guardian about The Tempest and talking about how that story shifts into all kinds of versions. I mean, modern, ancient, feminist, you name it.
And some of the borrowing is deliberate, and some of it is almost not quite accidental, but let's say it's an inspiration. It's not a retelling in all of these fields. But no, I mean, I think the Sherlock Holmes stories carry a special resonance because of the characters. It's not the times. I think, as we can see from the examples of the stories in this collection, the inspiration is not an inspiration to write a Victorian story. The inspiration is to write a story about either those remarkable characters, Holmes and Watson, or people like them that basically use their brains in a way to separate themselves from society and seek the truth, seek justice, and are compelled by those desires. That's kind of the common theme of all of these stories. Is the remarkable individuals who appear in them. Whether it's, as in Anne Perry's story, an actor who played Sherlock Holmes who suddenly finds himself thrust into being Sherlock Holmes, or in Kent Kruger's story about a young boy who believes that he is sort of channeling Sherlock Holmes and finds himself in the middle of a mystery, and so on. They're all about remarkable individuals.
Yeah, and really the possibilities there are endless. I mean, you can take this and extract it to, as you said, different time frames, different locales, different generations. It sounds like it's something that will just continue.
I think there's no...
Well, we've been very pleased. Go ahead, Laurie.
No, I just was saying I don't think there's any doubt that it will continue to influence and shape future generations of storytelling and story reading.
We're having fun at the moment assembling the cast of looks like it'll be Volume 4. That won't come out, of course, till 2018, and I won't mention names yet, but it's another eclectic mix. And once again, friends are saying, "Can I? Really? You'll let me?" And it's just a thrill to put together the group.
So, one of the things we were talking about at the Chautauqua conference that the BSI just held at the Chautauqua Institution was this notion of the cyclical interest, waxing and waning of interest in Sherlock Holmes, given, obviously a lot of what happens in popular culture, the media, the movie industry in particular. Are you sensing any kind of cooling off at this point? Or, I mean, it sounds like to me that you've got a backlog that you could go even further than your next volume if you really pushed it.
Absolutely. Laurie is just. I mean, Laurie's Mary Russell series is certainly not. Unless she may be getting tired, but the fans aren't. And the buzz at BoucherCon about this book was really nice. Very enthusiastic reception. The short answer is no, Scott. I don't see any diminishment of interest. We look at other things. We look at television. Elementary is going strong, about to go into its, sixth season now? Or is it fifth season?
I think it's in 5,
BBC's Sherlock is generating lots of interest as the fourth season comes out next year. There's still lots of buzz about the Robert Downey film. We have the new Will Ferrell film that's been announced. I'm actually working on a film being made in Dubai called Moriarty, which is a Sherlock Holmes meets a serial killer film, and gritty, but got lots of wonderful Sherlockian elements in it. You may have to do another 100 episodes.
Oh, good Lord! And we'll have to have you on again, evidently.
Oh, that's the bad part. Yeah,
nothing wrong with that at all. So, kind of running with that, do you see any opportunity to take? I wouldn't ever suggest the entire collection, but some of these gems, some of these short stories, and bring them to life in other media?
Are you pitching us to produce a television series?
Not yet, but I'm wondering if
we're there.
If you
have, we're ready.
Yeah, I'll bet. Any in particular that
Laurie
you could see?
King and Les Klinger present. How's that? Who's that Alfred Hitchcock guy?
Okay, there goes my entire life. I have very small hours to myself now, and I can hear Les just taking every minute of my day now.
Sorry, dear. What can I say? But we're going to have to be deeply involved in casting. I can see that. It's wow, Scott, this is a whole new vista.
There we go. Well, look, if executives from Netflix are watching this or listening, this could be a great opportunity for some original programming.
Some of it original.
I think you're right. But I think, unfortunately, television is still not ready to go back to the old anthology shows, which I certainly loved, whether it was the Twilight Zone or Outer Limits or Alfred Hitchcock or shows like that. Anthologies, which featured wonderful writers, were great, but I'm just not sure television's there yet.
Yeah. And it's funny because I enjoy both Twilight Zone and Alfred Hitchcock Presents on Netflix. And, I watch the credits pretty religiously, and, Hitchcock was basically serving the same role as the two of you, finding really interesting short stories. He went about it in reverse.
Yes.
He found the short stories rather than the authors, but he managed to form these anthologies that were just absolutely fascinating. And when you package them together on a Netflix and you can binge watch, it just really makes for some fascinating entertainment.
Yeah, and he had a stable of great writers, of course, too. Writers like Charles Beaumont, who also wrote a lot for Twilight Zone, and many others. Just wonderful writers. It was a golden age of television in that respect, at least for writers. And it's interesting. I mean, I actually like your idea, Scott. This is a new golden age of television, and writing seems to be king again. No pun intended, Laurie. As we see wonderful shows like The Wire or just really well done television in the mystery genre. I'm going to call some folks.
Well, here we go. I love it. So, were there any disappointments to you along the way? Were there any things that you would have liked to have seen your authors approach, or a direction you'd like them to take?
Well, this could be an advertisement for those folks out there. Yes, Walter Mosley, Stephen King, if you're listening, we still would like to have stories from you.
This seems like a very good time to muse just for 60 seconds or so on the Baker Street Journal.
When it comes to reading various points of view, on the ins and outs of Sherlock Holmes, there's no better source than the Baker Street Journal. Like the dozens of creative concepts that Les and Laurie have received from contributors to their anthology series over the years, the BSJ continues to be a place of humor and scholarship from creative Sherlockian minds from around the world. It could be seasoned Baker Street irregulars, new recruits via the Baker Street Babes, people who discovered Sherlock Holmes in a quiet corner of a library, on a Saturday afternoon at a matinee showing of a Basil Rathbone film, reading Nicholas Meyer's The 7% Solution, watching a faithful portrayal from Jeremy Brett, or a cartoon mouse, or from an online exchange with like-minded souls. We've seen contributions to the Baker Street Journal from people just like that, and more. You needn't be scholarly to contribute to the BSJ, nor to read it. The Baker Street Journal stands as a monument, if you will, to the enduring love of Sherlock Holmes and his times. We hope you'll support this important cultural icon by contributing and subscribing to the BSJ. At less than $1 a week, you'll have the best Sherlockian scholarship in your hands on a regular basis. Expand your view of the world with the wonderful ideas and writing of people from all walks of life. You'll find them in the pages of the BSJ. Subscribe today at bakerstreetjournal.com.
I think that there's a lot of writers who just either don't do a lot of short stories or can't quite get their heads around this kind of thing. I mean, there have been one or two where we've said, here's this great series of anthologies, some great writers, and they look at it and say, yes, that looks fascinating, but I just can't, I can't write like that. So I think we've been lucky to have the kinds of people we have, because for one thing, as I said, there's not a lot of money in this. Anthologies in general are not, New York Times best-selling volumes. They're a great way to meet people and to experiment with new writers. But as a writer, I don't do a whole lot of short stories because I have a mortgage to pay.
And therefore, neither of us is going to be taking up being anthology editors full time, Scott. This is right. The editors don't make a lot of money either, by the way, lest you were thinking we were somehow exploiting all these writers.
No.
Of course, one of the nice things is that when you do something for an anthology, generally there's a limited time when the anthology owns it, and you can then take the story and put it online for your own sale. So modern technology means that a story such as one of these in the current volume will have a life of its own after the volume disappears from the shelves at Barnes & Noble.
We would hope it
By the way, I mean, I should say, there will be an audiobook, again, of this collection. And the last one, it was Blackstone Audio. And they used different readers for each of the stories. And I think did just a marvelous job of pairing reader and story. And speaking as an author, I mean, the second collection had only my second short story ever in it. And it was really a special thrill, not just to be in the anthology. Laurie thought the story was actually good enough. That was very exciting. But to then hear an audio reader read it on the audiobook, that was really thrilling. And I'm looking forward to the audio of this collection.
That's great. Who read for your story?
I don't know. It wasn't credited on the jacket. It listed sort of all the readers, but it didn't tell which stories were read by which people.
Interesting. So it was just professional readers. It wasn't celebrity or anything like that.
Well, there was one exception. We had in the second volume we had a story by Harlan Ellison, and Harlan wanted very much to read his own story and did.
That's wonderful. I'm glad to hear it. So, as you have both mentioned, you have day jobs, you have other responsibilities. Laurie, what are you currently working on outside of Echoes of Sherlock Holmes?
I'm in the rewrite phase of a contemporary thriller, just for a change of pace.
Care to tell us more about that?
Yeah, it's based on a number of short stories that I have done over the years that nobody but me realized were linked, and they piece together. The book is the working title is Career Day. I'm not sure if we'll end up with that, but it's set at a middle school on the California coast. And I don't know if you've ever participated in a career day, but they bring people from all kinds of different jobs to talk to kids about the possibilities in life and where they can go. Everything from fireman and nurse to writer. I've been involved in a few of them. I've stopped doing them simply because I think that it's unfair to tell kids that they really should become writers. I didn't want those conversations with a lot of parents to say, my kid thinks he's going to make a living off of fiction, because honestly, it's a rare thing. Anyway, so it's set at a career day at a middle school, and there's a shooting. You learn that at the very beginning, that there's a shooting. But it's a matter of piecing together who and how and when and why. So it's very, very different from the Russell and Holmes. The last Russell and Holmes was The Murder of Mary Russell, about which I will say nothing but the title.
Oh, good Lord.
Except that people were shocked at the title.
Well, I guess you could say it's not the end of the series.
Well, that's kind of given away by the fact that my own anthology of short stories, which is called Mary Russell's War, has just come out in ebook and will be out in paper very soon. There is a story set, I think, eight months after the murder of Mary Russell, so it sort of is a giveaway. But you have to read it to find out.
It's kind of like
and there will be another Russell and Holmes the following year. Career Day will be out in 2017, and so I'll do another Russell and Holmes in 18. And so probably set in London. I'd like to do one set at the Tower of London. I think that would be a lot of fun.
I love that. So how many Holmes Russell volumes is that now?
Oh Lord, I think it's 14.
Wow, that's fantastic. So,
yeah.
Well, Les, what about you? What are you annotating these days?
You didn't mention another project. Well, so there's 3 projects that I want to mention quickly, Scott. One of them, let me just say the 2 annotated. So the annotated Frankenstein comes out in 2017 in August, and also the annotated Watchmen, the Alan Moore graphic novel, will come out next year as well. But there's another project that I want to mention that Laurie is deeply involved in, and that's an anthology, sort of a true crime anthology, I guess is one way to describe it. Laura Caldwell and I are co-editing a volume called Anatomy of Innocence. That will be published in February of 2017. And it is subtitled Testimonies of the Wrongly Convicted. What we've done is we have paired exonerees, people who have been wrongly convicted and subsequently exonerated, with major mystery and thriller writers, including Laurie, to tell their stories or to tell a chapter of their stories. It's a very powerful book. It's a non-profit project. All of the revenues will go to the Life After Innocence project at Loyola University Chicago. It's published by Norton. It'll be out in February 2017.
Oh, that is fascinating, Les. And, it's funny because earlier in the program you both talked about, just doing this because you love doing it. You're not going to get rich off of editing Sherlock Holmes stories. And for those people who write Sherlock Holmes pastiches, most of them do it not as a vocation, but simply as a hobby. But what you're talking about here, Les, with this new volume, it's not only a labor of love, it's something that you're doing good. You're doing for society. That must feel extraordinarily rewarding.
It's really just been a wonderful project. We involved, again, Laura and I reached out to a lot of friends. So we have Lee Child and Sarah Poretsky and Gail Wins and S.J. Roseanne and Jan Burke and Gary Phillips and bunches of friends who are involved. Every one of the writers, and Laurie can speak for herself about this, but I think every one of the writers has just been blown away, just astounded at meeting these and talking to these wonderful people. These are some of somebody said they are the luckiest unlucky people you've ever met. These are people with amazing strength of character who have survived, in one case, as much as 27 years in prison, only to come out finally to achieve recognition of their innocence and try and regain their lives.
Really fascinating.
Yeah, they divided it up into a series. Each of us wrote about a different case, but it follows the sequence that each of the exonerees experienced, so that the knock on the door, you're just going through your daily life and suddenly you're accused of something. The interrogation, which occasionally amounted to torture. I had the chapter to deal with the trial itself, and I read through the trial transcript, which was disturbingly short, and found the story exactly there. I mean, my piece is basically lifted from the transcript itself, with comments from my exoneree, whose name is Ray Towler, and the power of these people's words, this simple fact that they were just normal people on whom hell descended, was just astonishing. And I think all of us started with the same, when we were asked, would you write this? All of us started by thinking, I don't know if I want to do something, because surely these people were guilty of something. And you then read through and you thought, no, they're not. They're guilty of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Okay. And guilty of being poor, guilty of being overly innocent and sure that nothing really bad will happen to me because I didn't do it. And so here you have these people whose, my guy spent 28 years in prison.
Oh, my goodness.
Before the project said, yeah, nothing there would justify a conviction.
Wow. And among these exonerees, when you talk to them, or your co-authors talk to them, was there a prevailing sense of gratitude, or was there more bitterness there? What was your experience with that?
My guy wasn't bitter at all, and I don't think most of them were. I mean, I think that they're grateful for the possibility of getting their stories out there. I would be furious. I would just rage. But these, I don't know if they had it beaten out of them or if they're just better people than I am.
I think, Laurie, this is what carried them through the years in prison, was the flame burning inside, knowing that they were innocent, and knowing that anger and resentment isn't a different approach. I'm not saying they were happy. I'm saying that they've come out feeling positive about their lives, as Laurie said, very grateful for the people who helped them along the way. And some were rescued by Innocence projects. Some were exonerated on the basis of witnesses recanting and prosecutors deciding that they'd made a mistake. A whole range of stories. But by and large, I think what we found, and certainly what Laura has experienced in her working with the exonerees on a day-to-day basis, is that they are strong, not angry, not hostile. They're not. They are positive.
Well, that's a great message for readers. I hope it really gets a lot of attention when it comes out next year.
We're hoping so.
Yeah. Well, you needn't wait until next year to get a fine piece of work by Laurie R. King and Leslie S. Klinger. Get yourself to whatever entity sells books that you prefer, whether it's a physical bookstore, whether it is Amazon, could be even the Pegasus Books website itself. And check out Echoes of Sherlock Holmes, stories inspired by the Sherlock Holmes canon, this third volume in this wonderful anthology series by Les and Laurie. Well, Les and Laurie, thank you so much for taking the time to tell your story here, and I hope we get an opportunity to chat with you again about some fascinating projects.
I was so sorry to miss that conversation. I never realized how long it takes to produce an anthology. They must have been at this for 2 years, and I would have loved talking to them about it. And many people don't realize what it takes to produce a show like this. Friends, it takes you by giving us your feedback and comments. Call us. Please call us at 774-221-READ. That's 774-221-7323. I can never get that right. 774-221-7323. Or email us at comment@ihearofsherlock.com or go to our website. We would love your feedback and leave us a review on iTunes. Who knows? We might be so grateful we would send you one of our Sherlock Holmes brand products, but probably not this one. Friends, none of us are getting any younger. That's why you'll want to retire in style to Sherlock's home. It's luxury living for the literary, with our Reichenbach Falls spa and steam room, physical therapy in our Baritsu gym, the latest books in our British Museum reading room, and 3 meals a day from Mrs. Hudson's kitchen. It's the only senior living solution that delivers the 3 C's. Canonical, continuing, care. Why not spend your golden years where everyone's an old irregular? Discover Sherlock's home for sophisticated senior living today. Well, that gets us to the end of our time together, and the only thing that's... now how am I going to conjure Scott into... wait a second, I bet I know how to do this.
Well, this has been great. So, until next time, I'm Scott Monty.
And I'm Bert Wolder.
And together we say, The game's afoot.
You know, I'm afraid that in the pleasure of this conversation, I'm neglecting business of importance, which awaits me elsewhere.
Thank you for listening. Please be sure to join us again for the next episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast dedicated to Sherlock Holmes.
Goodbye, and good luck, and believe me to be, my dear fellow, very sincerely yours, Sherlock Holmes.
One alone to be my own, I alone to know her caresses, one to be eternally the one my worshiping soul possesses. At her call, I'd give my all my life and all my love enduring. This would be a magic word